Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our zED talk today on Zowe. Our presenter will be Dan Jast, who is a IBM Z Client Technical Specialist working out of the Poughkeepsie Client Experience Center. He has been with IBM for about 3 years now and focuses on Z modernization technologies. He's been working closely with Zowe since it was first released in the fall of 2018. His presentation today will be about 30 to 40 minutes. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A area, and I will ask them either during or after the presentation to Dan. Also be aware that these sessions will be recorded, and I will send out the link to the recording once it's available. There will also be a poll at the end with a few questions. So as soon as you close your WebEx, you'll see that poll. And if you wouldn't mind taking a minute or two to answer those questions, that would be great to help us improve in the future. So with that, I'll pass it off to you, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So hi, everyone. My name is Dan Jast, just as Brian just said. Just as he mentioned, he gave me a nice big introduction there, so I don't think I need to go into myself too much. But I work for the Client Experience Centers as a kind of a two-role guy. I do a system programming for them, but I also kind of focus on all the Z modernization technologies, ZOS Connect, ZOSMF, Zowe, OpenShift, ZCX, the list goes on. And I do a lot of presentations based off of those technologies as well. But when Zowe got launched in August of 2018, I saw a great opportunity here. I'm very passionate about helping people get onto the platform and making ZOS easier to consume for new users. And I think Zowe really fits in to that whole ideology there very well. So I usually do this presentation, over the course of an hour to 90 minutes. So this is going to be a little bit slimmed down. But I did send Brian the slides, who he'll distribute to the rest of you. And you could feel free to look through some of the backup slides that I would usually go over there if you need any more information. But also feel free to ask questions throughout the session as well. You could throw those in the chat, I guess. Awesome. So let's continue. So a little bit about Zowe to start off. Let's go over some of the basics. So although I'm here as an IBMer to talk to you today, I'm going to use kind of my open source hat here. One of my roles is actually being on the Zowe onboarding squad, and that's one of the squads that helps people onboard onto Zowe as well as install the product. But IBM is Zowe is not an IBM product, or it used to not be, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit as we go here. But IBM is an initial contributor to Zowe, along with Rocket and Broadcom, who formerly CA. All three of us have contributed pieces that have built up this framework that we're going to look at today, which we now call Zowe. What Zowe is it's an open source framework that is heavily extensible, and we're trying to provide more cloud-ready, cloud-like interfaces to interact with ZOS. And one of the really cool parts about this is we've had open source on the platform before. If you're familiar with Isoda, Anaconda is an open source project on Z that runs on Z. But that is focused on a very specific piece for Python, where Zowe is focused on ZOS at the core. We are focusing on opening up ZOS and making it easier to interact with, as well as letting us interact with some other cloud technologies that this enables, such as some of these that are listed here on the bottom left. Zowe is a project that is under the Open Mainframe project, which is a subset of the Linux Foundation. So if you're unfamiliar with the Open Mainframe project, there's a lot of links and stuff at the end of this presentation I suggest you go check out. One of those is the Open Mainframe project. I think it's .org. There's a lot of great projects aside from Zowe happening there. And if you're interested in this whole mainframe modernization space, that's a great place to go. There's a lot of great collaboration going on in there from the open community and a lot of really great projects coming out. I think there's something like 16 projects happening over there right now. So definitely go familiarize yourself over there. And then on the bottom right here, we have our repo for Zowe. As I said, this is open source, so all the code for the Zowe platform is right there on our GitHub. Feel free to go out there and raise issues if you find any bugs or if you want any enhancements. Our developers are looking at that on the regular, so it's a great way to interact with the developers as well. So going into the vision statement here, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is where I am very passionate. We are trying to reduce the learning curve of coming onto the platform. As Brian mentioned, I've only been here at IBM now for 3 years. I'm on ZOS for about 3 years as well. And one of the most wild parts when I see a new person come onto the platform is having to watch them learn 3270 ISPF, navigating the panels, figuring out, JCL. This is, no one's learning this stuff in college right now, and I wish they were, but they're not. Um, and what I would love to see is making Z more easy to digest for the new users, so new hires can get brought up to speed quicker, but also so that they can leverage skills that they've gained in college and really apply those to the platform very quickly. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here, right? Reduce that learning curve, providing these cloud-like experiences and cloud-like interfaces. And hopefully in that too, we'll demystify the platform a bit and attract new people to the platform. If it's not, green screen everything, very proprietary skill to interact with ZOS, hopefully we can attract new people. And in attracting new people, we'll also attract new workloads. And that's a really exciting area of bringing some of that distributed technology that people have been working with for years and applying that to our platform and seeing the benefits there. So let's kind of get into the technology here a bit, and then I'm going to hop into a nice big demo, and that's kind of where I think a lot of the value out of my sessions is brought out. So I definitely want to make sure I get enough time here to do the big demo that I usually do. So starting out on the left here, we have our Z14, right? And then in these red boxes, moving to the right, we have our different interfaces that we would normally interact with ZOS with. So, it's the top three here, TSO, ISPF, Unix System Services are our main three, right? That's how we're interacting with the panels or with the Unix system subsystem, the Unix subsystem there. And then we're using Rex and JCL, right, to modify our data, submit jobs, configure the system to be the way we want it to be. Then we also have our different product interfaces, right? Such as Kix, DB2, MQ, ZOS Connect. A lot of different product interfaces that either provide panels or APIs or, even some provide web GUIs that we can interact with as well. But notice I skipped ZOSMF here at the top. And the reason I skipped that to start is that because ZOSMF is, the underlying backbone per se of what drives a lot of the Zowe out of the box functionality. And remember, I said everything is extendable here, so we actually don't need ZOSMF as a prerequisite. But if you want to use all the out of the box functionality on Zowe, then you are going to need to configure ZOSMF for REST APIs as a prerequisite. But what ZOSMF provides is these REST APIs, so dataset APIs, job APIs, Unix System Services APIs, and different system APIs like doing a display command or a TSO command via an API call. These are all different APIs that ZOSMF provides. And then what we do is we want to wrap these APIs with different things to make interacting with ZOS easier. And that's going to bring me into my first area of Zowe here, which is the Zowe API mediation layer, this bottom part. So Zowe is made up of three major pieces. The first of those is the API mediation layer. What this API mediation layer is you can think of this almost as your internal API catalog for your ZOS-based REST APIs. And notice I am saying internal and ZOS-based REST APIs. And I don't want people to get confused here about the difference between ZOS Connect and what the Zowe API mediation layer is trying to achieve. ZOS Connect is targeted at your client and customer-facing applications, where the API mediation layer is focused at exposing APIs for your internal development, system programmer, and operations type teams. So one is, external facing, the other is internal. ZOS Connect has a lot more functionality on the external facing of, microservice enabling and API enabling COBOL applications and all that good stuff there. That's not where the API mediation layer is focusing. How we can extend the API mediation layer APIs aside the one out of the box, or let's say you have Kix and you have the CMCI REST APIs that come along with Kix. You can add those APIs to your API mediation layer and have them all accessible from a single place. And you might be wondering, why would I want to do that, right? Why would I want to add my APIs to the API mediation layer? And the answer to that question is because there's a lot of different benefits you get by hosting your APIs here. One of the major ones that I like to talk about is what's called the Zowe API mediation layer gateway. And this gateway is a single port that you can hide all of these different APIs behind So you can start making your developers and your operations folks' life easier when they want to start interacting with these APIs, because you can have them all behind one port. You can customize the URL that API is being called upon. And it just makes interacting with these APIs a lot simpler. What we could also do is take the Swagger documentation, which is the open standard for API documentation, and put that into our API mediation layer here to make interacting and viewing these APIs even easier. Some other benefits of hosting your APIs here: high availability, load balancing. There's some extra security that goes on here as well, such as single sign-on, and we're working on some multi-factor authentication stuff here. So a lot of great assets here that you could host your APIs here within the API mediation layer. Then moving on to the next section, how are we basically now taking these APIs and wrapping them with different interfaces to make interacting with ZOS easier, right? That's what I said the major goal was. So starting out, we'll talk about the web desktop here. The Zowe web desktop, you might hear about it as the Zowe application framework as well. It's got a couple names. But this is a browser-based web desktop, so it runs right in your browser. Has a very Windowsy look and feel to it, as you'll see in a couple minutes here after I start demoing. And we provide a lot of out-of-the-box applications here, and the big three that get a lot of attention are the MVS, USS, and JES Explorers. These are GUI applications into your different subsystems to interact with your different data. We also provide a lot of other out-of-the-box applications on the desktop that I'll show off shortly. But as I mentioned, every piece is extendable, so the Zowe desktop is also extendable. So if you have any application that's written in an application framework for React, Angular, or iframe, you could take that GUI application and plug it into the Zowe web desktop here very easily. For example, we do a lot of work internally in the Client Experience Center with Isoda. So what we did is we took Jupyter Notebooks, which you use to interact with the Isoda product, and we've taken those Jupyter Notebooks and made them available within the Zowe web desktop here. So we never have to leave the Zowe web desktop to edit data sets, view files and Unix system services, and then also work with our Jupyter Notebooks. Pretty cool. And then moving on, probably the part that gets some of the most attention here, the Zowe CLI. And the Zowe CLI has one big difference than the other two pieces here, and that is that it is the only piece that runs off platform today. The other two run on platform, they run on ZOS. The Zowe CLI today, we claim that it does not run on ZOS. It only runs anywhere where Node.js can run off platform. So that can be your Mac, your Windows, your Linux PC, your server. If Node.js runs there, there's a great chance that the Zowe CLI can run there as well. And what this provides is a command line interface into these REST APIs that let you interact with ZOS. So imagine a command to submit a job such as Zowe jobs submit dataset, specify the dataset name, and push enter. And that's kind of a command you could experience there for how to submit a job via Zowe CLI command. Now, this is really powerful in itself, but this takes a lot of learning as well to learn a whole command line interface, right? Just to interact with ZOS, where maybe at this point, it might be easier to interact with the panels. But we can do a lot with these commands for the Zowe CLI, and this is where it starts getting really exciting. So there's two major use cases here. One is the ability to script these commands in any programming language of your choice. So if you are a Python scripter or Python developer coming out of college and you wanted to see how you can apply your Python, you can take these Zowe CLI commands and start scripting them in Python and start parsing the output from these commands and adding them to very complicated scripts and code to achieve some pretty complicated tasks on ZOS. And I'll give you some examples of that here in a minute. The second use case is leveraging this CLI as a framework and plugging it into your IDE of choice. So Visual Studio Code, Microsoft's big IDE, one of the most popular IDEs on the marketplace right now, has a Zowe Explorer extension that leverages your Zowe CLI installation on your workstation and uses that as a framework to let you access your datasets, your Unix system files, and your jobs right within Visual Studio Code. And that is really cool and getting a ton of use today. And I'm going to demo all of this about right now. So are there any questions? I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat yet. Brian, have you seen anything come through, or should I hop into the demo?
Oh, it looks like you're good to go.
All right, cool. So with that, demo. All right, so here we are. We're going to hop into the API mediation layer really quickly first and just show you around a bit. So first, let's log in. And here we are within the API mediation layer. When I just logged in there, all that's happening in the background of where that user ID is coming from is my ID in RACF, my normal TSO ID. That's what I logged in with. It has authentication. It has authority to the ZOSMF REST APIs. And that's really all that's happening in the background is if you give that user ID authority to ZOSMF, it can then use Zowe in turn. Or if you're using Zowe for a specific use case like Kix, and you have that ID have authority to Kix, then that ID will be able to use the Zowe Kix services as well. So pretty simple how the backend security works there. I'm going to hop into the datasets and Unix file services here, but if I did have my own custom APIs added, it would just appear as another one of these boxes. Pretty simple, very well documented on the Zowe documentation on how to add your own APIs there. So I'm going to hop into the datasets and Unix file services here. We're going to hop over to datasets actually. And here's where we can start browsing through what some of these APIs do. But I like looking at it in a different way. I actually like going out to the Swagger documentation. It's a little bit more graphically pleasing to me. But it also lets me try out the APIs, which I really like to show here. So this API here, get a list of members of a partition data set, right? If you're unfamiliar with that, that's like basically a folder on ZOS data sets, multiple data sets within a single folder. So we're going to push try it out, and I'm going to type in my JCL library here. And when I push execute, we get a response in JSON of all the different members here that are in that JCL library today. So the reason I like to show this off early is think about this as I go through the rest of my demo, because this is the foundation for the web GUI applications that you're going to see, parsing this output and displaying it in a web browser in a specific way, or even the command line interface. This is the same API call under the covers that would do that same PDS member list for a Zowe CLI command. So just, this is kind of the API foundation of how we're going to be displaying specific data that we're trying to reach on our system. So with that, I'm going to hop back over to the Zowe web desktop here. And we're going to log in. Okay. So now that we're in the Zowe web desktop, we can see that this has a very Windowsy looking feel, just as I kind of mentioned, right? Date and time on the bottom right. We can see our user ID and log out here if we wanted to. This has multi-language support. So if you wanted to have, international, workers in your organization work on this, you can have multi-language support here on the desktop, as well as a little notifications tab. And right now there's no notifications, but I promise by the end of my demo, there will be notifications here. So mapped on the bottom here, we do have some default applications. There is an editor that you can access your Unix system services files as well as your data sets right here, as well as this has a lot of language support in it. But because of the Visual Studio Code extension, I say that this is less powerful than that right now. So I tell people to go there, but this is still very powerful in itself and has been gaining a lot of updates over the Zowe versions over time. We also provide a VT terminal for SSH and Telnet capabilities, as well as a very lightweight 3270 emulator here, because we do recognize that not every function on ZOS is API enabled today. So if I wanted to log in here and do any specific tasks that I would want to do, I could definitely log in here and do that exact same thing as I wanted to. And as I mentioned, this is very lightweight. This does have some limited capabilities as what you can do from custom keystroke type of thing, and you can add certificates to your 3270 sessions here if your part requires a certificate to connect. But it does get the job done if you don't require the specific things to connect there. But let's kind of hop into some of the applications that get the most attention here. And those are the MVS Explorer, JES Explorer, and Unix System Services Explorer applications. So let me just make this a little bigger. All right, perfect. So here's that same JCL library that I showed off before, right? And here are all those members listed out in a graphical way that we saw listed as JSON before. What I want to do first is I'm going to allocate these dataset1 and dataset2 files here in my demo. But what I want to do first is delete those so I don't have to, error out when I allocate them. So if I was in ISPF 3.4, I would go to the specific line of the dataset, make sure I'm in the right column so I don't freeze my screen, push D there on that line, and hopefully delete the dataset and deleted the right dataset, right? Here, I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to push delete member. And I'm going to push OK, that it gives me a nice little confirmation message, and it's deleted. I'm going to do the same thing for the next one. But this just shows how if a new user came on to, the MBS Explorer and needed to delete a data set, I would hope that they would, think to right-click and push delete. That's a much simpler for a new user to come on and try. And that's a very basic example. But as I kind of keep going here, you'll see some more of those examples as well. So I'm going to hop over here into my little JCL job here that I run. What this job does is it allocates those dataset1 and dataset2 files one by one, and then executes a little rec script here that writes a little bit of a line of text into my file that's allocated. But what you can see here is we do get JCL syntax highlighting right here within the MBS Explorer. This JCL syntax highlighting is actually really powerful because we can actually scroll over some of these parameters here and learn about them. And I just saw a question pop up in chat there, so I want to answer that one if I can. Does that interface support PDSE members? I believe it does. I want to say that we can access PDSE members here. I know in Visual Studio Code we absolutely can, but I'm pretty sure that they've been adding enhancements here to the desktop as well to edit data sets as well, to generate new data sets. I see that you're writing that now. I'm not sure if we can create new data sets unless we have a predefined data set already that's in a PDSE or a PDSE member, and we can basically duplicate that member and copy its attributes over. But so let's say I want to edit this job here. I'm going to change this to dataset1. And I'm going to push save at the top here. And we can see a nice little save success message. And let's say our job's ready to go. So I'm going to push right click again. And you can see my other options here. But I'm going to push submit. And we get a nice little submit successful message at the bottom here with the job ID. Something that we're working towards here is making that job ID an executable. So we can just click that job ID, and in context, we can now launch the JES Explorer and launch right into that job that we had just submitted based off of that job ID. But here, we're working towards that. We're also working on making fields within the 3270 emulator executable and launching these type of applications. But these are coming in future updates as well. But here's our job that we submitted. It maps the return code out for us so we can see we got a return code 0. I'm going to hop through just as we normally would see in our normal, SDSF or JES viewer of choice. We could look at our data just as we normally would here to debug our job or make sure everything ran successfully. I could also right-click here. If I wanted to purge that job, I can click Purge Job. And as I mentioned, once I clicked Purge Job, we can see that we get a little notification here seeing that the purge request succeeded. So that's a pretty cool little feature that we're working out there too with that notifications area. So now, when I go back here and I refresh my high-level qualifier, I see that dataset 1 has been allocated, and it says the file has been created about 2 minutes ago when I ran this job the first time. One thing I did forget to show off here is that this line up here is my high-level qualifier. So if I was trying to be in ISPF 3.4 and looking through different data sets, let's say I wanted to go to my mentor's high-level qualifier here, I could put in his high-level qualifier. And once the data sets load, you can see here that now I could be within all of his data sets here. And he always likes to leave me little messages here. I could extend this a little bit longer, but see, he leaves me little messages during my demos here. So yeah, I just like to show that off too. The Unix System Services Explorer is very similar to that as well. It's just navigating through your Unix System Services files. I see another question in the chat. I see how new member creation is different from submitting allocate member job, or is it the same? Great question. So how are we kind of creating new members in that MBS Explorer there? So I'm going to show that really quickly now. So if I wanted to create a new member, all I have to do is right click on that PDS and do new dataset member. Specify the name. You do test. Push OK. And now we can see that we have a data set as test here that we can work with. They are working on getting more data set attribute options out here. So we can actually, modify the attributes of these data sets as we allocate them, more specifically. Right now, basically, I have a predefined data set, attribute list basically in the back end on my ZOS that it's pulling from to allocate these data sets on how big they are, what block size, all this type of stuff. The only other thing I like to show off here on the desktop is that here are the 3 sample applications for React, Angular, and iframe. And this is kind of how you can follow the way these applications are put here. And that is how we can basically bring our own applications and plug them into the desktop. All right, so moving on, we're going to move on to the Zowe CLI now. And we're going to go to my Mac. So we're going to hop into my Mac terminal here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for everyone to see. And right what I'm going to do, so this is my Mac terminal, no tricks, I'm open here. I'm just going to issue the word Zowe. And this is going to print out the Zowe command line for me so we can see what the different command options are. So some of these are out of the box and some of these are plugins. So Kix is a plugin and ZOS connector plugins. I work with those 2 products very regularly. So I do want to work with the Zowe CLI commands for those. But one thing you might be wondering is how am I connecting back to my how am I connecting back to my ZOS systems through my local Mac's laptop here, my local Mac terminal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Zowe profiles list ZOSMF, and this is going to show all the profiles that I've set up on my Zowe CLI to connect to different ZOSMF subsystems on different LPARs. So each one of these lines is a different LPAR. So in these profiles, I have my host name, my user ID, my password, the port that I'm running ZOSMF on. And there's a lot of other parameters too you can add that are more on the optional side of things. But that's kind of how I'm connecting back to different systems. So what I'm going to do now is I'll prove to you that I'm connecting. So I'm going to do a Zowe ZOSMF check status, and I do have that share 2 LPAR set because I am a system programmer for the share LPAR that drives a lot of the demos for the share community. But here we can see that my user ID, Dan Jast, has successfully connected to ZOSMF on the share host name there. There's the port that ZOSMF is running, as well as the ZOS version and the ZOSMF version. It also prints out some information here on all the plugins that we have configured on this ZOSMF environment. And since this is a very heavily collaborative environment, this has almost all the plugins for ZOSMF enabled. So then we can start doing commands. Like let's say we wanted to do a TSO command. We can, issue a TSO LU Dan Jast, an LU against my user ID. It's listing out the rackf attributes about my user ID, and that's all printed out right here within my Mac terminal as well. One thing I do like to show off here is if I add a -h to any command, that gives me my help options. So there's a lot of other parameters I can add here. See, I can add a lot of different parameters. What I can also do is if you're a developer, you can get the response in JSON. So it's much easier to parse that response and work with that output in your code that you're working on. So that's some pretty cool stuff there. Also I don't have this command ready to go right now for this demo, but if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to do a list of all your APF authorized data sets, you can also use your Unix normal tooling there, like a grep command, to then parse out all the specific APF authorized data sets that you're looking for via that output. So pretty cool stuff there as well. But let's look at kind of how those 2 use cases that I mentioned before. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to skip right over to my big script here that I'm going to show off. Usually I show two little easier scripts that kind of build the whole idea here. But we're going to switch to this nice big script, and what this script does is it adds user IDs to ZOS. So when I create this script, I am by no means a great developer within IBM. I am much more on the client-facing presentation side of things than a developer at heart. So this is a simple bash script that adds a user ID to ZOS. So what it first does is it asks the user a couple things, like what's the user ID name that you want to add, description, and then what system do you want to add that ID to. And that's where then the script goes and sets the profiles for that LPAR that I want to add that user ID to. So it goes through, it sets those profiles that are required for this whole thing here to that LPAR, and then we get into the meat of the script here. And you're probably seeing this and thinking I'm crazy because I have JCL inline in bash scripts here. And why would I do that, right? You're probably thinking, well, there's a couple different reasons. One is that a lot of our shops, a lot of our ZOS shops have been using JCL for years now, right? We have processes that are set out, that are simplified, that we know work, that are written in JCL. So why should we change them, right? Let's leverage that same proven working code that we've been working with for years to do the same tasks that we want to do now. So this is the JCL that my team has been using to add user IDs to ZOS with for, I think maybe 30 years already. Another advantage here is that when this command runs, this Zowe ZOS files upload to dataset command, you notice that there's actually variables within the JCL here. And when this uploads from the script, it replaces those variable values into the JCL. And when that job is then run with these subsequent steps right here, it runs with those values plugged in, and it's really, really powerful. So that's exactly what we do is we take all those jobs and we submit them one by one in an automated fashion. This script usually takes about 15 seconds to run in total. And then basically at the end, we have a nice little loop here. We basically list out our user ID via tsolu command again. And then what we do is we have a little loop here that lets you specify RACF groups that you want to connect your ID to. Very simple stuff happening here, but really cool to see that we can use, and this could be Python, this could be TypeScript, this could be JavaScript, your programming language of choice you can use to automate this process here and change, I don't know how long it takes you to add a user ID to ZOS, but it usually takes me about 15 to 20 minutes. Now in 15 seconds, I can do this with this script. So it's pretty powerful to accelerate certain processes that you have. But let's hop over to the Zowe Explorer, and this is the plugin here for the Zowe CLI into Visual Studio Code here. So what I've done to enable this, and this is really cool, in the extensions area of Visual Studio Code here, I have two extensions enabled that are going to drive this demo. One is this Zowe Explorer plugin, which is what provides this whole panel here. And then what we also have installed is the IBM Z Open Editor extension. And what that provides is full COBOL, PL1, and JCL syntax support for those specific languages. And I'll show you what some of that means here in a second, because it's really, really cool. But let's kind of go through that same process that we showed off before. So here's my high-level qualifier. I searched danjas.jcl up here. So now I have that same JCL library. Here's that same dataset one that we allocated before, and that same test data set that I allocated before. But let's hop over back into that job. We'll change this to dataset 2. We'll push save. We can see that dataset uploaded successfully here. So that means it's saved back to our ZOS system. Then I'm going to right click, and we can see we have a bunch of different options here as well. Copy, rename, delete member, edit member, add this to favorites. Let me know where you can do that on ISPF. As well as pull this dataset from the mainframe. We can download this locally, but something we can also do is submit this as a job, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to push submit, and we can get the job submitted message down here, and we actually can click the job ID here. So that's exactly what I'm going to do, and it puts me right here into the bottom. and I could look at that same job output as I normally would, as I said before, in SDSF or my normal JES viewer. Now, when I come back here and refresh my high level qualifier, we can see that now dataset 2 has been, allocated, which is really, really cool. Now, as I mentioned, well, first of all, you saw that JCL syntax highlighting was prevalent here as well. It notices that because I have the IBM Z Open Editor extension added, and when it sees anything .jcl, it automatically maps members there to be JCL syntax highlight, capable there. But when we're working in a modern IDE, we get a lot of really, really cool features. And, if you've been a Java developer ever, or, a Python developer, and you've worked in modern IDEs, you've had experiences that you've never experienced in ISPF, such as syntax checking, syntax completion. There's a lot of really cool things happening here. So let's say I wanted to create a job to mount a ZFS. And, I'll be honest, I don't write JCL from scratch ever. But if you needed to write JCL from scratch, let's say the first thing we would need to do is add the job card, right? That's the first thing at the top of every job. So what I'm going to go do, and this is all enabled via the IBM Z Open Editor, and what I'm about to show off works across COBOL and PL1 as well. So really cool stuff. I'm going to type job, and I'm going to find the job card parameter. I'm going to push enter, and it auto-fills the whole job card for me. I can now edit this job card, get it to my liking, and move on. So now I said I wanted to mount a ZFS. I'll go find that program name. I'll push enter. It autofills all that. And now I can edit this to get to the next program. There is a wide list of programs here that you can see that are within this to autofill. And there's more and more getting added by the open community, on a monthly basis. And as I mentioned, this works for COBOL and PL1 as well. So you can experience this same type of look and feel here with code completion, with the COBOL and PL1 as well. Also, there are some other extensions, such as this HCL-Z tools that's provided by HCL, as well as some of the Broadcom ones that provide even further functionality, such as, unit testing and, specific things here for your other ZOS developers. But we also can do some really cool things, just that are, features of the IDE itself. So this is a job that I run to change all my user IDs that I run my Zowe lab with, to change them all for specific labs and stuff like that. So let's say I wanted to change all the passwords for the share conference one day. All I got to do is highlight the user ID, change all occurrences. It's now repeated my cursor 30 times across all these different user IDs, and I can come in here, and change my my password to any password that I wanted to change it to. So pretty cool stuff there. There's a lot of different, really cool capabilities that Visual Studio Code has itself. It would take me 2 years just to learn all the capabilities that Visual Studio Code has in it, itself. It's a very powerful IDE, probably the most powerful and popular on the marketplace today. And really cool also because a lot of developers coming out of college and new hires or people that have skills off platform have been using Visual Studio Code for years already. So really, really cool stuff here. So that basically completes the demo. Did I miss any questions? I see that there's a question about where you can kind of get access to a system, potentially with Zowe on it. There is a Z trial option that I have linked at the end of the slide here where you can go play around with Zowe on Z trials. But kind of, I have never actually run through that myself since I host my own. So yeah, that's kind of the best advice I can give is that Z trials there. If you're within IBM, I can talk to you aside for other options that you may have. I've seen another question. How can one get onboarded onto Zowe? Sandbox, mainframe environment, I think that I would give the same type of answer there with zTrial. I know they give you pretty good access to Zowe there. I'm pretty sure that Zowe doesn't run very well on ZD&T machines because they don't run Java workloads very well, and a lot of the Zowe desktop and Zowe API mediation layer are driven through Java. So I think there's a limitation there on that side. But yeah, I think the zTrial is kind of the best way to go. There are links to the end of the presentation that I'll touch on that kind of highlight some of the areas that that will be better to interact with to help get onboarded onto Zowe as well. I'll make sure I highlight that before this ends. So we're going to move pretty quickly here towards the end. Plugins for Zowe. Here's a look at the ecosystem. On the left, we have all the a bunch, not all of them, but a bunch of the CLI plugins that extend the CLI. On the right, we have a lot of the web desktop applications that extend the Zowe web desktop. So if you're a customer of one of these applications, ask your product teams what they're doing around Zowe, and maybe you can start interacting with them via one of the newer interfaces that they're providing on top of the Zowe framework here. Some of the open source directions, and as I said, Brian will have these slides to distribute, so you can look at some of these on your own time, but these are some of the things that we're looking at to enhance Zowe with over time. Some big ones to highlight: multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, running Zowe in a container now that we have ZCX, running on the platform, and there's a bunch of others too. I'll let you kind of look at those. From an IBM perspective, these two charts are the list of IBM products and how we are plugging into the Zowe framework now. There's a lot more coming in this space as well. We have a lot more IBM products that I know that are in the works. I do see a couple of them in here, but I do know of a couple more that are in the works that are working on getting plugins into the Zowe framework as well. Now, I did mention in the very beginning that, although this is an open source project and it's not owned by IBM, now there is a piece of it that almost is, right? And what I want to describe there is now that IBM is actually shipping a distribution of Zowe. And the reason we wanted to do that is because a lot of customers were complaining that they did not trust downloading code from an open source repository that's on zowe.org, right? They normally download from shopz. They download via a PID and, the full SMPE install type of look and feel there. And that's exactly what we're providing now is we're, fulfilling orders through shopz to download the, the Zowe product that's being distributed by IBM. We also do a little bit of extra, security checking that all IBM products have to undergo to get put up onto shopz. So there's also a little bit more security, checking happening there. What we also do is we package Node.js, the SDK for Node.js with the Zowe product here. So that's not a separate download anymore for you. Another cool thing here is that a lot of customers wanted some type of support for Zowe, and we now do, the PID is free to download this on shopz, but we do provide a paid for support and services model as well that goes along with Zowe. And these are two use cases that are listed here in these next two slides on kind of why you would want to go with the IBM Z distribution versus the open source, and some of the use cases of why you would want to do that. So closing us out here, here are a bunch of the links that I was talking about before. So definitely go visit the Open Mainframe project. They have a lot of great projects going on right now that I definitely suggest you get involved with. Help influence direction, help talk out ideas in the Open Mainframe project. Go to the Open Mainframe project Slack channel. And for the person who asked about how to get onboarded onto Zowe, best place to do that is come to the Zowe onboarding Slack channel. We will help you with anything you need there. For sure, you will probably be responded to by me in that channel as well. Zowe on Z trials, here's the link for that. You could follow this link to get to the Z trials. As well as this basics badge here that InnerSkill provides. What I would say about this, and bear with me here, because I think that this session, although this was a little bit quicker than most, the InnerSkill basics badge is all about the basics of Zowe. And this session gave you a lot of what the basics of Zowe are. So if you wanted an easy badge to, throw on your LinkedIn, this is a very easy one to go get now because you basically just got the full training and you can go skip to the quiz now, in my opinion. You can let me know how that goes for you if you try that out. Zowe documentation is actually really good. It's all, written in the open source, so we have a lot of people that are working on it, including me. I'm one of the people that helping enhance the documentation to make it easier to follow for our users. So, don't be afraid of the Zowe documentation at all. But there's a lot of other great links in here. Slack and GitHub are definitely the two best places to interact with our teams on the Zowe side. But also, feel free to reach out to myself or Brian, and we can help connect you to any of the people that you would need to be connected to kind of get moving forward with any of this that we discussed today. So just want to say thank you. Thanks for the time, Brian, and the whole Z Council, zED, team here for letting me come and present. If you have any follow-up questions or anything like that, you can definitely feel free to reach out to me. My email was on the first slide here. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. So thanks for the time, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right, great. Thanks, Dan. Great job as usual. So thanks for taking the time to present today. I think Dan was able to cover all the questions. Seeing some come in here right at the end. So we'll try to get to those, personally offline. But if anybody else has any follow-up questions as well, feel free to reach out to Dan or myself. I know we're running a little bit over time, so I want to try to close the session up. As a reminder, I'll send out the recording of today's session along with the presentation deck. Also remember that once you close your WebEx, there will be a survey that pops up. If you could take a minute or two to fill that out, that'd be very helpful. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We look forward to our next zED talk on blockchain, which will be next month. And everybody have a good rest of your day. Thanks again, Dan.